Okay, so this is my first £5 craft challenge. I said I was going to spend my £5 at IKEA, and that is what I did. And this is what I bought. I bought 2 tea towels. These were £2.50 for the 2 of them. And there's one which has got this kind of slightly spotted and also other shapes pattern on it. And then there's one which is pale pink, plain pale pink, and it's got a little lace trim at one end, and they're quite a good size, and they're tea towels, but they're quite soft and they're quite a nice kind of cotton to use. So I thought that was quite a good start. Some fabric, and the pattern one you can see has got some lace trim on it as well. And then to go with those, I bought this. This was £1.95, and it is a packet of 3 bath scrubbery things. I never really know what these are actually called, but anyway, you can see why I chose them, because they're in similar colours to the fabric of the tea towels. So I bought them thinking, well, I'm not quite sure what I can do with them, but they feel like they go together. There's quite a lot of fabric. There must be something. So the first thing I did was to explore the bath scrubbers, and what I discovered is apparently if you pull them apart, what you get is just a tube of the netting. So that's what we're going to try next. So I'm going to get a pair of scissors. And I think what I'm going to do is start with the pink one, because I think that's the one I mind least if I mess it up. So, okay, so you can see at the bottom there's a bit where the sort of tag comes through. So I'm going to see what happens if I unclip that. So that's pulled out. Oh, there we go. Pulled out the stringy bit. And exactly right. This is what you get. A big strip of netting. And that's quite long. So that's quite cool. So I'm going to do that with the others. So you can see I've done that to all 3 of these bath scrubbery things. And now I've got 3 long tubes of net in different colours, and this is quite sturdy. It's basically plastic. It's like the kind of stuff that your satsumas come in at the supermarket, and you can see it's really long. I haven't measured it, but let's just do a rough thing. I'd say it's about 2.5 meters, so there's quite a lot of that. And what I think I'm going to do is try plaiting these 3 strands together to hopefully make something that will be quite a stable kind of cord, and then I'm going to use that to stabilise what I plan to make out of the tea towels. So this is what I've ended up with. You can see it's quite strong, it's very pretty, and I think it's going to work really well for what I have in mind. I have just stitched the ends. I sort of knotted and then stitched that end, and then I just stitched across at this end to hold them while I plaited it. You could clip them together. I also slightly wonder if you could use a lighter and melt the end of this, because it is just plastic, and fuse them together. But I haven't tried that, so I don't know. Stitching worked well for me, and I am going to probably end up cutting some of this, and I'll just stitch where I cut it, and that will hold the ends there, and then I might tie them into a sort of knot or something to make it look more decorative. So on to my fabric, and what I want is to measure how long that is, and then I'm going to work out how big a circle that will make. So let's see, that is I'm not going to include the lace bit. That is, I'm going to call that 69. It's slightly over 69, but I'm going to call it 69, so that when I divide that by 3, I get 23. And that is going to be slightly too big. I'm going to cut, I think, a 21 centimetre circle, and that will be the base of what I want. And I'm just thinking, if I cut, no, I'm going to cut them. Going to cut it from the pink, not from that. So 21 centimetre circle. Here's what I am going to do. I don't want the hem, so I'm going to cut off the hem section on this tea towel. Let's get rid of that. A little bit there. And the hanging tag. And I'm going to cut this side off as well. And in fact what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a 21 centimetre circle template out of cardboard, and then I'm going to cut a circle out of this that would be slightly bigger to give me a seam allowance. And I'm also going to cut a circle the same size out of just some spare fabric that I've got. So I've cut out my cardboard circle. Mine ended up being a really thick cardboard. It's from an old magazine rack, really thick cardboard, and it's also got this quite nice fabric backing on it. And because of that, I'm actually going to do slightly less to this than I had planned. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the two circles that I've cut out. So I cut the cardboard first and just use that as a template to draw out my circles, and I'll use that as a sewing line. And I'm going to take one of those, and on the cardboard side I'm going to glue it down and overlap the edges. And I might otherwise, if this hadn't been such a nice surface, I might have done another circle slightly smaller and glued it on top, but I'm not going to bother. And I'm going to use, because it's what I had handy and because for me it's always slightly nostalgic, I'm going to use some copy decks. But you could certainly use PVA or any other kind of glue that sticks fabric to fabric in this case, or fabric to cardboard, depending what you've got handy, and that's fine. And then just with the circle, fold it over, scrunch it in. I mean, you could cut snips in this if you wanted it to be particularly smooth, and I guess particularly if you've got slightly thicker fabric than this might be worth doing. But to be honest, this part that we're working on at the moment isn't really going to be seen terribly much, and so I'll probably just go around and flatten it a little bit after I finish gluing it, but I'm not going to worry too much if it doesn't look absolutely pristine. And that's why you could get away with, even if you've just got cardboard, ordinary cardboard, just doing one side if that's all you wanted to do. But I just thought I would make this with this cardboard that I had lying around, and I think it's going to work really well for what I have in mind. So just check it on the other side. That looks nice and flat. Flatten it down. If you've got a bone folder, something like that, you might want to go over and flatten it. And if you've got bits like this where it's slightly sticking up, just put another blob of glue in. There's no need to hold back on this. And of course the wonderful thing about using copy decks is then you get to peel it off your fingers later. So there we go, that is covered and that is finished, and that is all I'm going to do to that. I'm just going to set it to one side, let the glue go off properly, and by the time I'm ready for it, that'll be ready to go. So with the other circle, now do you remember we worked out how big to make this circle according to how long the tea towel was? So I know that this is going to go round the circumference of that circle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my tea towel not quite in half, and I am going to leave the long hems on this piece. I think I'm going to take the short hems off, but I'm going to leave the long hems on because they'll be exactly where I want them. I might use that lacy trim a little bit later on. I haven't decided yet, but we'll certainly keep it just in case. If yours have just got ordinary plain hems, there's no particular reason why you should keep those, but because mine's got that lacy a little bit, it might be a nice trim later on. So we're just going to take those off, and then what I want to do is cut this not in half and not quite 1/3, 2/3, but somewhere in between. So mine was folded in the shop. That would be sort of 1/3 and that would be 2/3, and I want it nearer than that but not identical. So I want mine about like this, I think. So I've got a few inches, one is a few inches wider than the other. While I'm here, I'm also going to cut off that label because we don't need the washing instructions. I think that looks about right. So I'm going to cut along this long edge here. And what I'm going to do before I stitch these to the circle, I'm going to swap that over so we've got both of them right side up, lay them on top of each other, and I'm going to stitch in some pockets. And I think I'm going to stitch these so that I've got, let's see, that would be half, that would be a quarter. I'm going to stitch them so I've got about 6 pockets going around. So I'm going to measure that now. They don't have to be identical, but I'd like them to be approximately evenly spaced. So I'm just going to work out where to put those and then just stitch these 2 layers together along those gaps. So this is pinned, ready for stitching. And I just want to say, because the calculations I did were a bit rough and ready, your circle won't necessarily be precisely the right size to fit onto the rest of your bag. There are 2 things you can do depending whether it's too big or too small. If your circle is slightly too small, the easiest thing to do is to go back to where you sewed this together, your straight pieces, and just take in a little bit extra seam allowance there, quarter of an inch, half an inch, whatever you think you need to make it sure it fits the circle that you've cut for the base. If your circle is slightly too big, which actually mine was, not by much, but it was just slightly too big, and I didn't want there to be any tucks and so on there. So all I've done is, as I've pinned it, I've gone back and pinned it again and moved it slightly outwards, so I'll end up sewing a line that's just inside of the sewing line that I'd originally marked. Again, you can see it's not by much, maybe sort of quarter of an inch all the way around, and that's just given it enough extra ease to lie flat. So you do want it to sit flat and like that when you sew it. So I finished sewing that, and I have just taken my pinking shears and trimmed the edges of the seam with that, and I also trimmed the edges of the side seam as well. If you wanted to, you could overlock that seam if you had an overlocker, or use a zigzag or a sort of faux overlocking stitch on a normal machine if that's what you've got. If you were being super fancy, you could trim it with bias binding and that would hold it really stable. I think because actually that's going to be hidden by the base that we made earlier, I'm not going to worry about that too much, and so actually just using the pinking shears I think will be fine. I mean, it is cotton, it's woven cotton, it is going to fray a bit. It's not super fray fabric. I think that's going to be perfectly fine. But, you know, depending on the fabric you're using and also how much wear and tear you think your final bag is going to get, you might want to do a different trim on the seam. So I'm just going to check. I'm going to turn this inside out, check that the base fits, otherwise this may all go slightly horribly wrong. Well, it's not the end of the world. We just cut a new cardboard circle and recover that. But hopefully this one will fit. Should do, because it's the same size circle. There, that's fine. Actually, because we ended up sewing the circle slightly smaller, it overlaps a little bit, but I quite like the way that looks. So you can see what we're aiming for, hopefully at this point. We're aiming for a sort of a bucket bag, which has got pockets on the outside. You see how the hem that was already there on the tea towels provides the hem on those pockets, and also at the top of the bag. That's what's out quite well. I wasn't quite sure in my head what sort of size this would end up being, but I'm quite pleased with that. I think possibly I might have made these pockets a bit shorter, but what I might just do is stitch a line around a couple of inches up from the base, and then that'll hold the pockets so that I can put a pen in without it disappearing. Yeah, I think I might do that actually. Now, obviously what we've still got is our plaited plastic rope. And there are a couple of things I think I'm going to do with this to sort of add a bit more weight to the bag. So I've been thinking, I think I'm going to stitch some around the top of the pockets and also around the top of the bag. And that will just add a little bit of extra rigidity, not masses, but just a little bit of extra rigidity to the bag so that it'll sort of stand up hopefully a bit better. And I'm also wondering about possibly putting some around the bottom, but I'm not sure about that. Or maybe if I do this extra seam here, maybe I'll sew some on there. So that's what I'm going to do next, is apply my cord. So I've attached the cord to the top of the bag, You can see at the end, I didn't even bother to try and overlap it or do it neatly. All I've done is I've zigzagged over all the 3 strands on either side and then cut them off, and it makes this kind of little, almost like a pom-pom effect. It's not going to fray because it's just plastic. The netting's just going to pull apart, and I think it's quite pretty. So I'm just going to leave that like that. What I'm going to do finally, I think, is just glue the cardboard base into the bottom of the bag. I am not going to put a handle on this or a drawstring, and I'm just going to see how well that works as I use it. But you certainly could, particularly if you didn't do this cord at the top, or you could use this cord as the drawstring. You could just fold that over and make a casing and put a drawstring cord in there so that you can you know, pull it up like this, and that could work maybe as a makeup bag, put things in the pockets and then inside. But what I really want this to be actually is basically just to sit on my desk in my craft room and contain tools, you know, the kind of stuff you need all the time, but it's just nice to have it a bit organised. So there'll be I guess some scissors and some brushes and rulers, and then inside sort of glue sticks and, you know, the sort of stuff you reach for all the time, but it's nice to be able to have it in a sort of slightly more organised place. So as I say, I'm just going to glue the base into the bottom of the bag, and I'm going to be reasonably generous with the Copydex and then smear it around. You do want it to be smeared around rather than flat. Let me just grab, I never have proper smearers, I just use bits of cardboard or whatever I've got to hand. And, you know, be quite generous, go right to the edge, don't go onto your table like me. Because it's fabric, you do want to give it a couple of moments just to go tacky. Obviously, depending on what kind of glue you're using, follow the instructions for that. But that should work for that. And pop that straight in the bin. Rub off the bits I've got on the wrong side. Rub off the bits on my table. Gluing is, honestly, it's my worst thing. I get it everywhere. But as I say, with Copydex, the beauty is it's really fun to peel off. So just going to be reasonably careful as I pop this in. I don't really want to smear glue everywhere else in the bag, but I probably have. And there we go. So just make sure that's sort of centered according to where your outer circle is, and smooth as you can. And you see why I didn't really bother too much about the seam edge, fabric edge on the bottom of the base, because that's all contained within this, and so it's really not going to be visible at all. There's a bit of a bump there from that seam, but I'm okay with that. And then inside you can see nice neat base. I don't know if you can see, but that's the base, holding it quite sturdy. It's quite a good depth. Possibly you could get away with it shorter. You could just have it that sort of depth and just have the pockets in there, but I quite like that there's a lot of space in there. And hopefully once that's full of stuff, it won't be quite so floppy. We shall see. So that is my craft storage bag bucket £5 IKEA challenge. Next month, well, I've spent my £5 already. Next month I have spent my £5 in paper chase. £5 doesn't go very far in paper chase, I've discovered, but nonetheless I've spent it, and I will be back with another video. If you want to join in, you can spend your £5 anywhere, and just tag your video £5 craft challenge, link to it in the comments, and I'll be sure to share it. I'd love to see what other people can do with £5. Thanks for watching. See you next month.